Aubrey first contacted me about this, the reason why I told him I was kind of excited about it was over the years, as most of you know, there's hardly a ceremony that goes by that someone's intention isn't around, prosperity and abundance and all these things. And one of the things I started to realize is, because I would be in this category, if at some point you decide to kind of focus most of your attention on your personal development, whether you consider that, spiritual work or not, very oftentimes the kind of financial aspect of the world you kind of put to the side. It's in the peripheral. That was definitely my case, right? And then at some point, it's like I kind of came out of that was a very significant period. I don't want to make it sound like I'm belittling that. But right around the time that I realized, like, okay, I'm on the other side of that. Now there's things that I want to accomplish and need to get done. And I realized how little I knew about the world of money and how to make that work. So I know a lot of people in our community, from talking to them, are in that same category. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this, is for a lot of us to kind of learn what we don't know. We'll be asking, as Aubrey said, tonight will be more interactive, rather than just kind of present, I think, what he's going to do. There'll be some presentation, but I think what would be really helpful, since it's a smaller group, is kind of, we can focus more on where everyone is and what it is that you actually might need to kind of move forward from wherever you're at. And by the way, before we start, that's always the thing that would kind of drive me crazy about things like this, is that I always felt like there was a huge assumption on the part of the people facilitating that everybody there understood already, right? Kind of these like basic foundational things. And some things I understood and some things I didn't, but the things I didn't caused this big chasm and wouldn't really allow me to take advantage of like the rest of their knowledge. So I encourage everybody to like speak up and ask questions. And I know that what Aubrey would most like and what I would like is for every person who participates in this, like, to really gain some tools that help you move forward from wherever you are right now. And that's definitely what I need. So with that, Aubrey, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. All right. So we had the first session of this Spirit of Money. In that one, and the recording is available, I focused more literally on the spirit of money, what it's about, what's going on. And so if you want to go deeper into that, the recording is there. Tonight, I wanted to get much more practical, because the feedback that I got was, I want to know what to do, and I need to know in the environment, with the levers I can pull, what tools do I need and what knowledge do I need to take action? So that's the intention tonight. So now we've got some slides, and I'm going to just give you an overview. The whole time, this is going to be engagement open. So I invite you to raise your hand or just unmute and ask questions. And we're going to have a discussion throughout, but then at the end, a specific time just for discussion, just for questions. All right. So I do need to create the container. So first, we're going to have invocation, health in the body, peace in the spirit, love in the heart. It is this that we wish for ourselves, and it is this that we wish for all our sisters and our brothers. Health in the body, peace in the spirit, love in the heart, open paths. Thank you. So my intention is giving, pure and simple. We will have a moment for you to collect and distill your own intention. I do need, as part of creating the container, to let you know I am a financial advisor. And what that means is I am bound by law, if I'm giving financial advice, to do so in the best interest of the person that I'm serving. Since I'm not in your business, I don't know your life, your family members, your accounts, or any of that, this is not financial advice. But with that said, I hope that every single thing that we talk about, you take and use. So this is for you to take and use in your own life. But to be clear, it is not my specific instructions to you as an individual, because I don't have all the information to give that advice. I talked about this a little bit before. In case anyone wasn't here, this has been a journey of about 10 years, and I got a tap on the shoulder. It's about 10 years ago, that understanding the white man's coin and the energy that it represents is what I needed to be doing. And at the time, I was deep inside the corporate world. And just like when they unplugged Neo and got him out of the matrix, it took me a little while to get where I am now. But now this is what I do. I help people with money, and that's why I'm here. So now, a moment for your own intentions. Something brought you here. There's something in your life that you may want to change or bring attention to. I'm going to give 20 seconds. Bring that into your awareness. Why are you here? Thank you. Okay. The purpose, the intention, the direction of everything that I'm sharing tonight is to help you move towards financial independence. If you go look out on the web or read books or articles or podcasts, you will see this phrase, financial independence. Sometimes it's shortened to FI, financial independence. At its ultimate expression, it means that you have enough money saved and that money is making enough money to pay for your life for the rest of your life. And that is a very worthy goal, and it's very possible. But what's even more important is that every step that you take towards that, every amount of power that you move from those who are taking it from you perhaps at this moment to you towards financial independence gives you power to live more according to your values. So you might ask, okay, financial independence, what makes that possible? How does that happen? And it comes down to one number, and this was really surprising to me when I learned it. It is your savings rate. What that means is how much you keep compared to how much you make. And if you just know that number, I can tell you how long it is until you're financially free. If you make $40,000 a year and you save $20,000, that's a 50% savings rate. If you're making $100,000 and you save 50K, it's a 50% savings rate. It's the same amount of time at that savings rate until you reach financial independence. And there's an article, it's linked here. There will be a QR code at the end where you can get this whole presentation. But your savings rate, how much you keep of what you make, is the single most important number that will guide you to reaching financial independence. And the guy who came up with this, he has a funny name, Mr. Money Mustache. That's him on the bike. I know him. But this was really revolutionary to a lot of people. So this is your first assignment. I invite you to calculate your savings rate. Look at the last year, figure out what your life cost, and then how much of that did you keep? And I count many things as savings. It's not just money in a savings account. It's anything that you put away that increased your net worth. So it could be paying down debt. It could be the principal on your mortgage if you have one. It could be money going into a savings account or a company retirement plan or the company match that they're giving you, if you're fortunate enough to have one of those. So that's your first assignment. Figure out your savings rate. I'll have this again at the end. So I want to pause there, open it up. Questions, discussions, what's coming up?
Well, yeah, all kinds of stuff comes up. Well, I'm really, what I'm present to at the moment is how appropriate this is titled Spirit of Money, because as you're speaking, I noticed myself reflecting back, and I'm guessing other people are too, on my relationship with money, abundance, probably where it came from, places where I've been really strong in that area and places where I've been weak. So in other words, it's almost like a ceremony, it's like right away I'm finding myself challenging my own like strengths and inadequacies, fears and things around money, right? So I'll share with everyone in transparency when you ask about the intention. So as many of you know, because I've announced it, we met an incredible man who is now officially an investor for an official bird tribe retreat center that is looking like it's going to be close to Aubrey. At the moment, all 4 properties we're reviewing are in or close to Santa Barbara. So this is a huge financial endeavor that somebody else is taking on. And although there's other aspects of it, what that whole thing brought up for me was my insecurity and surprisingly kind of like unworthiness. I'm like, wow, like this somebody believes in what I am about and what I want to accomplish enough to invest money the least that I can do is get my financial act together, right? In terms of like understanding the language that he's speaking. And when you brought up the savings rate, I mean, I definitely have a savings, right? It's not an issue. And I feel overall, relative to my needs and lifestyle that I kind of aspire to, I would say that I'm, probably more abundant than most people. But at the same time, my concern is that we will get this property eventually. I want to be able to feel confident that I can contribute and not just kind of be on the sidelines. Now if I end up needing to live there and it doesn't have a house on it, I'm like, oh, I'll just get a prefab. Oh, can you afford that? Like, I realize like how insecure financially I actually am. Even though I make money, I realize I know very little about managing it and growing it. So that's my share.
Just to share for myself, my savings rate, if you look back 10 years ago, was negative. I was consistently going deeper and deeper into debt, putting groceries and restaurants on credit cards. I took a loan from my 401k and paid off $50,000 of credit card debt. And then my habits didn't change and I ran them all up again. So I ended up with $90,000 of credit card debt. And so I haven't made every mistake, but I've made a lot of mistakes. I've dug myself in real deep holes and climbed myself out. So if you ever think that I'm some know-it-all who just did a bunch of things right and thinks it's easy for everyone else, I do not. And it took a lot of self-reflection and really difficult changes in my life to go from there to where I am now, which is very different. So for me, even having a non-negative savings rate was an achievement. And eventually my savings rate got to be about 65%. That was the highest I think it ever was. That's my invitation to you, that getting non-negative, that's step one. And that may be very challenging. It was for me. But then once you start seeing what's possible, you can accelerate. And that's exactly what this is saying, that as your savings rate increases, 30, 40, 50% savings rate, suddenly the time that you have to work until your money is enough that it throws off enough profit each year to pay for your life gets shorter and shorter. So that, to me, that was a huge light bulb moment.
That's helpful to hear. If any of since we're on a little pause here, Cam or Laura or Christina, I'd be curious to know just kind of where you guys are at financially versus like, I don't mean like details, that's none of our business, but like, kind of where are you financially and what do you want to get from this time we're spending together?
Well, I'll go first. And I'm just spoiled because I have Aubrey as my financial advisor in-house. But I still don't make all the changes that he suggests, because I have a fear of running out of money. And so I like to like stockpile the money that I have. And it's turned out, looking back over the last few years, if I would have just put that money that I had in a stockpile into some investments, that I'd be much better off now than I would have 5 years ago. So I'm working on that. And now I'm working again. And so I'm getting more money in so I can work on my savings rate a little bit. And just tighten things up a little bit. Aubrey's really good about our budget, and he knows what we're spending on absolutely everything, like categorized. And so it makes it easier to kind of see where we need to go down on our spending to make a difference in the savings rate. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll add that it goes the other way too. We have a special category where we save all year. Lauren is my girlfriend, for our anniversary. And because that money is set aside in advance, there's money to go to our favorite restaurant, to order as many rounds of oysters as we want, have as many drinks as we want. And there isn't any tension about it because that money has been saved. I don't know exactly what amount, but $14.97 a month put away so that when that day comes, we can enjoy it without any feeling of scarcity or deprivation.
Laura, maybe?
I was totally about to like come on to, I, in the pandemic, worked in a COVID unit at a job I don't do any longer. And because of that, I have long COVID symptoms. So it's really hard for me to have like consistent income in those ways. I have to be really careful about how I expend my energy. And so that affects the income. Also, at the exact same time, I decided to stop working in that field and just work in a capacity of doing like energy healing and that type of thing. So I've been fortunate because that matches what I need, but the income is so different. And so navigating that has been really challenging. And again, I'm so blessed that that increases each year, but it has been a learning lesson in shifting beliefs about, you know, being able to feel safe to do those things and take those leaps and know I'm supported, and wanting to make sure that I can like expand from that and be able to continue to grow from that and not just feel like I'm fingers crossed and hoping everything works out, but like feeling comfortable and feeling supported. So that's kind of where I'm at in navigating things right now.
Yeah, you know, you brought up something came to mind when you were speaking that I was reflecting on from our last meeting, which is it's like you can do all the affirmations and like changing your beliefs around money that you want to. We've all done that if you're a spiritual person, and those things are important. I never want to sound like I'm belittling them. But at the end of the day, if you still don't understand the basics about money, it doesn't necessarily help. And one of the things I was thinking about, before I give this back over to Aubrey, unless one of you wants to speak, is I read this article and I was shocked that, you know, the vast majority of people that win the lotto, even if it's millions and millions of dollars, they lose it within a couple of years, right?
Yep.
And everybody thinks like, man, they're crazy. If I won that $6 million, I'm like, no, that's not true. If you don't understand money and you don't know what to do with it, you're going to blow through that $6 million like everybody else. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote myself a note to ask you about that, Aubrey. Like, have you found that to be true too? It's like, it doesn't matter if you win the biggest lotto. Everybody who understands money is going to come after you. And in no time at all, you'll be broke back where you were before.
Yes. Yeah. And here's how I have experienced it. I have about 70 people who I've worked with over the years as either coaching or financial advisors. And part of what I do is train and educate the people I work with to know the kind of volatility that they might see in their investments. And it's like brain training, heart training in advance. So you know it's coming. And in this recent market craziness, I know many other financial advisors, they're getting many calls with clients freaked out, but I haven't gotten even one. And it's because you can train your mind, your heart, and your soul in advance to be prepared. And when you tell the story about the lottery winners, they haven't developed, it's likely they have not developed the skill to handle that money. And so stuff happens, you know. So what I'm saying is that you can develop the skill, the knowledge, the education, the fortitude in advance so that you're ready when more money comes your way, whether it's a little amount or a big amount. I'm going to keep going a little bit. Since I wanted this to be very basic, in the best possible way, I really, as you said, Tony, I didn't want to make any assumptions that anyone knows anything. And so when we're talking about saving money, I don't assume that you necessarily know what I mean. Where does one save money? So I have a couple of different types of accounts. You know, there are bank accounts at the top. There's a checking account, a savings account, and a brokerage account, which is not at a bank, but it's also a kind of savings account. So the first, when you think of saving money, the first kind of place you might think is a checking or a savings account. And I mean, I have some steps that you can go through, like, okay, what do I do now? If you don't already have a savings account, I'll give you instructions on how to open one, and it should be paying you at least 3.75 or 4%. That's what a good savings account pays these days. But big banks like Chase and Bank of America, they're still paying 0.02%. So I've had clients with relatively large amounts of money in savings giving up tens of thousands of dollars of interest because they just don't have their money in the right account. So if you have a checking account, that's great. Open a savings account that pays at least 3.75% interest. And you can find those on bankrate.com and pick one. A brokerage account is like a checking and a savings account in that you can put money in and take money out whenever you want. But in a brokerage account, you can buy stocks and bonds and mutual funds and ETFs, and I'll explain what all those are. So a brokerage account, it's like a checking or a savings account, except now you get to pick what that money is invested in. And so when we talk about investing, I'm talking about taking cash money, just like you would have in a checking or a savings account, but now we're investing it in something. And the simplest, the first step account to do that is what's called a brokerage account. Any questions or clarifications?
This came up in the last meeting. I think what stops a lot of people is thinking that you need a lot of money to even approach something like a brokerage account, right? And you said, like, no, like, start with whatever the minimum is that they, require for you to open the thing.
$1, $5. Some
Yeah.
don't require you to transfer any money to open the account. I just went through this with someone you know, Tony, and they did require you to transfer an amount of money, but $1 was sufficient. And, so $5, $20, that's it. And I really believe in the ADHD world, which I'm a part of also, there's a phrase called breaking the seal. And whenever there's something unfamiliar or scary or unknown, I always encourage people that I'm helping to just go do it in the smallest way possible, the smallest, lowest risk way possible. Open a brokerage account, transfer $5, invest it in something. It's a totally reversible decision. You can move that money back into your checking account if you want to. You're not going to break anything. And if it's helpful, I can send a guide or an article, or you can even call me and I'll walk you through it. It'll take 10 or 15 minutes.
I have a question. What's the difference between a brokerage account and a money market account, which is what I currently have? I'm with Beneficial State Bank because they're like socially responsible.
Mm-hmm. If you're at Beneficial State Bank, and I know them well, and I think they're amazing.
Great.
Their rates in their savings accounts are not that great. And I wish, like, they're okay, but they could be better. So I use them and recommend them for checking. I do not recommend them for savings, just because they're offering about, well, I can check after our recording, but around 2%, and other banks are offering 4%. So if it's a significant amount of money, then that could, be a meaningful difference.
Yeah.
But
is it worth maintaining that and getting a brokerage account?
Yes, absolutely. Because in the brokerage account, what I recommend and what I'll share is that we will be investing in companies all around the country, all around the world. And you can only do that from a brokerage account or some of these other accounts, which are retirement accounts. You can do that in those too. But brokerage is the most flexible way that you can invest in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, that sort of thing.
Got it. Cool.
So if you've heard of any of these other accounts like IRAs, 401ks, those are retirement accounts. They also can invest in stocks, bonds, but they have more restrictions around them. I'll go into that in another session. The benefit you get is that in those retirement accounts, often things grow tax-free. And so that's the trade-off. The government writes laws that says, if you use these special accounts, we'll let your investments grow and not charge you taxes either ever or until later. I'll go into that in more detail in another time. Some other accounts you might have heard of, a 529 is a special kind of account for saving for education, like college. And then you might have heard of health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts, and dependent care spending accounts. So we'll get to all of those, but today I want to focus on checking, savings, brokerage. Keep it
Right.
simple. Actionable. The first step is to create a gap between what's coming in and what's going out. And as it was in my case, when I was going into debt to the tune of hundreds or thousands of dollars a month, I let that go on for several years, and I did not change my behavior. When I chose to, it was not easy. It meant changing where I lived. It meant changing how I shopped for food, how often I went out to eat at restaurants, whether I went out, hung out with certain friends. So this might involve big changes. If you're already spending about what you bring in, then consistently having 5% come out of your paycheck or when you get paid, that's the first step. That's the key to everything else. If it's 5%, then that's your savings rate. So at first, my recommendation is for that to go into a savings account. And I say that here, open a high yield savings account. It should pay at least 3.75%. That changes over time. So if you're looking at this a year from now, that might not be correct. But a high yield savings account should not pay 0.02% like Chase and Bank of America are paying. I can't even believe they call that a savings account. Thank you. Thank you, Relu. In that savings account, now that you have a small 5% savings rate, maybe you have more, that's great. Save $500, maybe it's $1,000. There are many, many people, a huge percentage of people, and I have been one of them, that do not have $500 in a savings account. So when the car needs tires, it goes on the credit card. So the first step is an emergency fund. So create an emergency fund. And then if you are paying off debt, this is sometimes debated by people. Should you only focus on paying off debt, or should you invest and pay off debt at the same time? My belief, what I did and what I recommend, is that you pay off debt and invest at the same time. It might be mostly paying off debt, like 9/10 of it, but putting a little away and investing is sending a signal that you are now taking agency over your future. You're consistently on track to pay off your debt, and you're putting some away. I find, even though mathematically, yes, if you were putting all of it towards paying off the debt, you would be out of debt slightly sooner. But it's turning a corner when you start putting money aside and then you see it growing, even as your debt is decreasing. So you can adjust how much goes. It might just be a little into the investments, but even if it's $20 a month, I'm going to show an example, $10 a month in a later slide, and how that can compound. And then once you have some money saved, then I would recommend it go into that brokerage account, into an investment, into an ETF or a mutual fund, and I'll explain what those are. And then track your money, track your spending. I use a piece of software called YNAB. It stands for You Need a Budget. You can use paper, you can use Excel, you can use Monarch Money. There's lots of tools. But paying attention to what you spend, bringing awareness. I look at my transactions every single day so that there aren't any surprises. That works very well for people with ADHD, by the way. And I work with a number of clients who are ADHD, because it's bringing feedback to the point of performance. The spending decision is informed by how much money do I have. Tracking your spending is really important.
I don't know about everybody else. I'm just mostly contemplating everything that you just shared. And it's when you first mentioned how important it was to figure out your savings rate. Again, my internal, we'll just call it intimidation and fear of money collapsed everything. And then later you said, well, decide what percentage of your income every month you're going to save, and that's your savings rate. I'm like, okay, I'm already further along than I was an hour ago.
Okay, good.
Really, something small like that is kind of it's very empowering. I'm like, oh, actually, that whole thing makes sense to me now. Yeah. I think the reason I share that is I think for a lot of us, any term at all that is foreign to your vocabulary around money brings up to me my insecurity and ignorance around the whole thing. But like anything, the minute that thing is demystified,
Mm-hmm.
it does become very empowering. So yeah, already I'm feeling better personally.
I'm glad. And savings rate, by the way, that is not something you will hear anyone outside of the financial independence community talk about. It is not something financial advisors in general talk about. I think it's revolutionary and very important. And so that's why I mention it. But this is not common knowledge. This is not the way most people think about finances. There is a community of probably hundreds of thousands of people in the financial independence community for which this is very familiar, but not the country as a whole or the world as a whole. So I think this is very valuable information and perspective. And if it's unfamiliar, then that's not surprising because it isn't taught and it isn't talked about. So we've been talking about investing, and very briefly, I want to go over, all right, I understand money in a checking account. I put the money in, there it is. I take it out, I spend it on things. In a savings account, maybe there's a little interest every month. If we're in that account, Aubrey recommends, and it's 4%. So if I have, and that's 4% a year. So that means if you have $100 in your savings account in a year, you'll have $104. So it's not huge, but as long as you're giving them the privilege of having your money, and by the way, they're lending it out roughly 10 times over and making interest on it. That's why they can pay you interest. You might as well get as much as you can out of them. So 4% for a savings account. When we're investing, we're doing something different. We're taking money and we're, in the case of a stock, we're buying a tiny piece of a huge company. And if that company does well, if we bought $100 of that company, if it does well, it might be worth $120, $150 at the end of the year, because companies can grow very quickly. So that's what a stock is. It's a tiny slice of a big company. And if the company does well, then the value of that slice increases in value. If it doesn't do well, then it decreases in value. A bond, it's the same idea, except instead of being a slice of a company, a bond is a slice of a loan. So someone loans someone else money, and you can become a lender, and you have a tiny slice of that loan. That's what a bond is. Bonds, just like loans, they tend to pay money very regularly. They don't go up and down a lot. So a bond is a slice of a loan. Now, if you've ever known anyone who said, "Oh, I'm going all in on GameStop," or AMC or Blockbuster Video, they were picking individual stocks. I do not recommend that. What I recommend is investing in almost every stock. So what you will be buying if you buy a mutual fund is a basket of anywhere from 100 to 500, or in some cases, 3,000 companies. So you just say, I want to buy VTSAX, and you've just bought every publicly traded company in the United States. You might have just spent $100 and bought $100 worth of that, but that money is spread over every publicly traded company in the United States. And whatever they do in terms of their performance, their growth, up or down, that's what your money is going to do. So a mutual fund is a basket of stocks or bonds. A mutual fund lives at a specific brokerage. And so they're not my favorite, but I want you to know what they are. An ETF is an exchange traded fund. It's exactly the same idea as a mutual fund in that it's a basket or a collection of stocks or bonds or a mixture of both, except it's traded on the open market. And so you can buy an ETF no matter what brokerage you're at, and you're not tied to them. If you want to move from Vanguard to Fidelity to Schwab, ETFs, the same ETFs, will be available from each of them. And so you're not locked in. And so in general, what I recommend are ETFs. And I'm going to show you some examples of those, both of which are geared towards environmental, social governance, and socially responsible investing. And so they hold a basket of companies that are selected based on the UNHCR criteria, but they each have their own slight tilt, to how they select. And this is an area where the finance world tries to make things more complicated than they are. In your investing life, you probably only need to be invested in 1 to 4 funds: US stocks, US bonds, and if you want, international developed stocks, like from developed countries, and international developing world stocks. There may be specific reasons you might want something else other than that, but it's very likely, like 90% of the people in this country, in the world, don't need more than 4 investments, and maybe they need as few as 1. So when I say the financial world, the financial industry overcomplicates things to justify their fees and their existence, this is an example of that. Here's an example of one of these ETFs that I'm talking about. This is Vanguard's Environmental Social Governance ETF. The letters that identify it are ESGV. And these aren't all the stocks that it holds, but these are the top holdings. And so you'll see companies that you're familiar with: Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Broadcom. So that's what they're invested in. Now, for some investors that I work with, this level of filtering is not adequate, and they want to leave out some of the names you see there for specific reasons. I can do that, but it's more trouble. So my recommendation as a starting point is to pick an ETF. If you do value environmental social governance, pick one that is filtered for that as a starting point. And if you want to go further, if you want to get more complicated, I can tell you how. But you're already doing so much better than not being in an ESG filtered fund. So here's another one. This is Dimensional Fund Advisors. They're based in Santa Monica, and they're really, really good at what they do. And they were one of the innovators in ESG investing over the last several decades. So it's very similar. And this was with Shireen Tony. We looked at the performance of these two funds. Not only were they almost identical to the S&P 500, they both outperformed the S&P 500 over the last 5 years.
Ooh.
So by not being invested in Exxon, for example, it's not like you're suffering in terms of your investing performance. If anything, you're doing slightly better. So I wouldn't say that that is guaranteed to be the case in the future. What I would say is likely is that your investing performance is likely to be very similar. So you're not giving up anything by tilting your investments toward environmental social governance. And so for that reason, with the people I advise, that's sort of my starting point, is one of these two funds. All right. Compound interest. Has anyone heard of the phrase compound interest? Yeah. So Albert Einstein, he called it the 8th wonder of the world. That may be apocryphal, but that may not be true, but it's possible he said it. Everything that we're doing when we talk about investing is relying on this phenomenon. And it's that you have a pile of money, maybe it's $100. In a year, if you're invested in something, or even if it's in a savings account, you're going to have $104 or $110. Now that $104 or $110 is going to grow. And so the money that your money made is going to make more money for you. And what this ends up happening is it's an exponential curve. And this example, we're talking about in a year, in 10 years, if you invest $100, and this is the average performance of the stock market, 7%, in 10 years, you'll have $200. So that's without doing anything, not contributing anymore. Now let's talk about if over those 10 years you added $10 a month to that $100. Now at the end of 10 years, instead of $200, you have $2,200. So now we're combining the power of compound interest with the power of regular contributions.
I don't think I'm fully understanding compound interest. Would you kind of break that down again?
Yeah. So just to make the numbers easier, let's say your money is going to grow by 10%. So you start out with $100. At the end of the year, you now have $110.
Right.
In the year that follows, now that $110 is going to grow by 10%. And so 110 times 1.1, now you have $121.
Got it. And that's why it's exponential, because you're
right. In the third year, now it's $133. Yes.
Okay. I finally understand that term. Thank you.
So you've been experiencing this. If you've ever had a credit card, you've just been on the wrong side of it. So once you start investing, what do I say? I say from now on, you'll be the one running the game. Your savings will be growing exponentially until it can pay for your life for the rest of your life.
Got it.
That's where we're headed. But yeah, as your pile of money gets larger, it makes more and more money. Yeah, Raluca, I was on the wrong side of it real bad for many years. Raluca says I'm on the wrong side of it for sure. And so that's part of why I recommend paying off debt is a very high priority, but invest a little because you're taking agency. You know, even as you're paying off, you know, you're settling that debt. It may take a number of years, and that's hard. But if you see even a small amount of money growing, and then you know that however much you're putting towards paying off that debt every month, when you're done, will go into building that savings that you've already started, that can help you keep going with paying off the debt. That was my experience, at least. So there's a link in here. As I said, there's a QR code at the end, and there's a link where you can play with this. You can put in $5 a month or $1 a month, and you can play with this and see what it does. So now I get to be, this is what pissed me off. This is part of what started me on this journey. When I saw financial advisors out there charging just 1% assets under management, and it doesn't sound like much, just 1%, okay, that doesn't sound like that much. If I have $100, then that advisor is only taking $1 a year. Doesn't sound that bad. If I have $1 million, then that advisor is only charging $10,000 a year. Now that's starting to feel like real money. It's not how much it is per year. Remember compound interest. It's how much you don't have over time. And so in this example, I have a financial advisor charging just 1% and putting you in investments that charge an additional 1%, which is very common. Not anything I would recommend, but it's very common. And so this person who's 30 years old, who saved up $75K, just leaving that alone, not adding any more to it, that $75K, when they're 40 years old, will turn into $147,000. And eventually, when they're in their 80s and 90s, we're talking $2 million, $4 million. It's amazing. That's the power of compound interest. But if you have a financial advisor skimming that 1% every year and the investments themselves charging 1% expense ratio every year, at age 90, this person, instead of having $4 million, has $1.4 million or $2.8 million less in their pockets, or 67% less. So as soon as I saw this, I fired my financial advisor. And because it was insane. And yet almost everyone in this country and the world who has a financial advisor is subject to this math. And so thankfully, that is not the only kind of financial advice you can get. There's now starting to be advice-only planners and hourly planners and flat fee. This is why I'm so passionate about this, because I don't want anyone that I know or that I can reach to be subject to this. First of all, I think you can do it yourself. You don't need a financial advisor. But if you do every now and then, there is no way I want them to have 2/3 of what could be your life savings. That's some of my pissed off energy. It comes out as generosity and a desire to give and help and educate. But part of it comes from how ridiculous this is. And I don't want it to go on any longer. Raluca, you're asking about Wealthfront. I like Wealthfront as a bank. I do not like them as a brokerage. So Wealthfront is what's called a robo-advisor. And so if you give them money, they will invest it in a selection of stocks, bonds, ETFs, according to like a form you fill out, which basically takes into account your age and risk tolerance. The problem I have with them is I think they're way too conservative for people who are young. And they also get you invested in a bunch of things that if they grow, it's very complex for you to get out of. If you're invested in a large number of stocks or ETFs, then if you ever want to simplify your portfolio, like I'm saying, just 1, 2, maybe 3 funds, then I've got to figure out when to sell those and how to sell them to minimize taxes. And so the portfolios I've inherited from Wealthfront are way more complicated than they need to be. So rather than having to unwind that later, I'd say just avoid it. If you can figure out the 1, 2, 3, or 4 funds that make sense for you to be invested in, and be in complete control. The reason I said I like them as a bank, they'll automatically spread your deposits over up to 16 accounts. So you can have FDIC insurance on up to $8 million of cash, and that's pretty neat. But if you have $8 million of cash, that's a lot of cash. So I think it's cool that Wealthfront does that, and I would not recommend them as a brokerage because of unnecessary complexity. Now, I open it up. We have 25 minutes. Any questions you have about something we talked about or about anything at all?
I'm looking at the notes that I took, and I kind of feel like I have like a tangible first time ever sort of plan of action.
I absolutely understand that the language, the words might be unfamiliar. And to some extent, that is intentional by the financial industry because they want to justify their existence with unnecessary complexity. So where I can help, if I can, is to communicate that it does not have to be complicated. It is not complicated, but it may take a little learning and familiarity and going through the steps of opening the brokerage account and transferring the funds and buying an ETF. Oh, that's it? Okay.
I'm glad you brought up, you said earlier when you were talking about Wealthfront that they were too conservative for young people. And I think that was something that I only learned like probably 4 or 5 years ago, that both your investment and your money management is definitely relative to what age you are and kind of what your financial goals are. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm 63 now and I'm in great shape and great health. So it makes me feel like I can be a lot more risky than other people, but that could have change at any time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could for anyone, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, I realized, yeah, I do want to be more conservative, but at the same time, I don't have, in theory, the same amount of time that somebody, Kim might be having. She's like, well, Kim, I know you're not a spring chicken, but you're also younger than I am. Give me a break. No, the point being, it's like, everything you brought up, like in our assignment here, and the things that I took notes on that I would do. Yeah, one of the things for sure that I would be looking at that would be in the back of my mind is those things relative to my age and what my goals are. Yeah, I wouldn't have retirement fund makes sense, except that I'm only 2 years from official retirement age anyway, right? Yeah, so just how I manage my money would look different than, probably the youngest person on the call, basically.
Yeah. And the concept that Tony is referring to is if you have a really long runway, if you're able to put money away and you don't need it this year or next year or even 10 years from now, then you can put it in an investment that's going to go way up and down. But because you don't need it, if that investment can be expected to grow more, you can handle the roller coaster because you don't need it for 10 years, 20, 30 years.
Right.
So that's a really important part of your portfolio, especially for young people who are likely to have that long runway. And so when I see very conservative investments for young people by default, that doesn't make sense. If there's something that you need the money for soon, like a down payment for a house, you don't want that going up and down. So that's a special case. Then it would make sense to have that in a savings account or a money market account. So yeah, depending on what you intend to do, how old you are, when you intend to do those things, that can guide how much risk you can take.
I'd also like to mention that your mathematics and your analysis covers the history of the entire stock market and what has happened through the Great Depression and the financial crisis of 2008. And it looks at your money, and if you just keep going and you don't pull out, then you're going to be in better shape than if you just panicked if there's a crisis.
Part of my approach and what Lauren is referring to is called historical analysis. So if I have an idea of, okay, I think this person has enough money saved to spend $4,000 a month for the rest of their life, I can put that person and their investments through the Great Depression, through the tech bubble bursting in 2000 through 2008, through the stagflation of 1970 through 1982. And I can see for sure they are going to be fine, even in those worst case scenarios. So the things that I'm saying aren't just pulled out of the air. They've been put through the very worst economic times that we've seen, and it still works. Now, would it be easy emotionally to go through and psychologically any of those experiences? Absolutely not. Just because I've seen the charts and the numbers, that doesn't mean the experience would be easy. But it does give me confidence when I say you're going to be okay, that the person really will be okay. Here's the QR code if anyone wants to grab that. I'll also send it out to everyone on the email, who signed up for the meeting and also the recording. So if you want to grab it, you can, but you'll get it either way. And that's my email. Like I said, sometimes a question that I can answer in, a 5-minute email can really make a big difference. So I do invite you to reach out and ask. And if I'm not the right person, I probably know someone who is.
I'm just gonna make Kim say something, even if it's goodbye.
I just feel like I'm a mess. Like when I learn all this stuff, I don't want to even think about it because I always take the road less traveled. I've screwed up so many times in my life. I feel abundant and blessed. I make good money, but I don't want to work full time, so I only work part time. I focus on a lot of, spending my time in ways that I think is better, but I don't really, consider the future as much as I know that I should have. So my husband does have a retirement and everything, but I'll be 63 this year. So
We're the same age, I had no idea.
yeah, so I'm not prepared. I mean, I don't have savings, so and then but I'm thinking about what Aubrey said as far as like spending down your debt is even considered savings. So I'm
Yep.
gonna have to go into that category because that's something that we focused on recently. I'm trying to start a business. I always do things backwards. So
What I want to share is we're in a whole category of people who have been busy doing other things, and suddenly you're 63 and realize maybe it's time to start thinking. So you're not alone, and we'll have to have a special session just for us.
I love it. Yeah, what I would say, Kim, is the idea of being behind. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's helpful at all. Every step that you take towards learning a little more or making a change that helps you now or in the future is a step for the better. And so whatever happened, wherever we are, it's always, what do I do now? That's it.
thank you.
One of my other favorite concepts from the financial independence community is what's called FU money. And if you've ever been in a job that you really didn't like, or in a situation that you really didn't like maybe a relationship, there's a certain amount of money where you feel confident walking out the door and saying, F you. So once you have that emergency fund, the $500, and you start saving up a little more, that can be your next milestone along the road. And it's a different amount, it might be a couple $1,000, enough to get into a different apartment for some people. For other people, it may be more. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, that even a small step, you don't have to have your whole rest of your life figured out tomorrow, but you get an emergency fund, and then you get FU money, and suddenly your choices broaden. You don't have to put up with that job or that person.
As a Brit, am I still allowed to invest in these things that you're talking about, or is it different? Do I have to do it in UK markets?
It's slightly different, and I have some amazing resources for you. Yes, you can invest in many of the same things, but
Okay.
it is slightly different. So this is what I would recommend. I'm putting it in the chat. Rebel Finance School. Alan and Katie Donegan, they're British. They lived outside of London. Now they travel the world helping people with money, but they have content specifically for UK people who are part of the financial independence community, and they're amazing human beings. By the way, Rebel Finance School, even if you're not a Brit, their content, they have Brit specific content, but their content is not just Brit specific. So They do live sessions like this, and just bring really, really great energy to everything they do.
I don't know the rest of you guys, but I know it feels daunting and like what Hallie just said, kind of feeling like bewildered. But I actually feel way more empowered than even from our first session. And I kind of feel like personally, there's light at the end of the tunnel, which for me means like within a year or so, I'm going to feel like kind of an adult. Managing.
You let me know what that feels like, Tony.
So, I mean, specifically an adult around like managing and having a basic understanding of my money, because in so many areas of my life, I definitely am living in the world as an adult and embrace that. And this is one of the places typically that I don't. So for me personally, it's like I said earlier, we're going to close in a spiritual quote unquote way. The whole thing is, it is almost like we're doing spiritual work in an area that we don't normally address. And I can already feel myself kind of leaning into embracing this aspect of my life and being a lot more holistic around not only my own personal finances, but in just understanding money in the world in general. So for me personally, I'm really grateful for that. Aubrey, you'll close us out.
Health in the body, peace in the spirit, love in the heart. It is this that we wish for ourselves, and it is this that we wish for all our sisters and our brothers. Health in the body, peace in the spirit, love in the heart. Whoosh!